The most dangerous thing you can say to a narcissist isn't loud, emotional, or dramatic. It's calm, it's final, and once you say it, they know they've lost access to you. There is one sentence that instantly removes their power, not because it hurts them, but because it starves them. And most people never realize why it works. Narcissists are not afraid of being exposed. They are not afraid of being yelled at. They are not even afraid of being disliked. What they fear is irrelevance. They fear losing their emotional grip on you. They survive on reactions, confusion, guilt, hope, defensiveness. That's how control stays alive. When you argue, they feel important. When you explain, they feel powerful. When you try to be understood, they feel needed. The moment you stop feeding that system, something shifts. They begin to feel unstable because they can no longer predict you. And unpredictability to a narcissist feels like danger. If this resonates, pause for a moment. Notice how calm clarity feels in your body compared to emotional chaos. Stay with this channel if you're learning how to protect your peace, set quiet boundaries, and reclaim your sense of self without needing approval or validation. Many people believe that narcissists are intimidated by strength, confidence, or direct confrontation. In reality, confrontation rarely scares them. In fact, it often does the opposite. When you argue, defend yourself, or try to prove your point, you are still engaging on their terms. You are still inside the dynamic they understand and control. A narcissist's sense of stability comes from control. Control over conversations, emotional reactions, narratives, and outcomes. As long as they can predict how you will respond, they feel safe. Even anger works in their favor because it confirms influence. If they can provoke you, confuse you, or pull you into explaining yourself, they remain in charge of the emotional environment. Loss of control. All, however, is different. It removes their leverage when they can no longer steer your emotions or pull you into circular discussions. Their usual strategies stop working. This is unsettling for them because their self-image depends on being the dominant force in the interaction. Without that dominance, they feel exposed and unsure. This is why calm disengagement is far more effective than confrontation. When you stop reacting emotionally, stop correcting their version of events, and stop trying to be understood, the power balance shifts. You are no longer participating in the game, and a game with only one player cannot continue. What's important to understand is that loss of control doesn't come from dramatic exits or long speeches. It comes from consistency, saying less, explaining less, repeating yourself less, following through quietly. Each time you respond with clarity instead of emotion, you reinforce the message that their influence is limited. This can look very simple from the outside. You may decline a conversation without justifying it. You may end an interaction without escalating it. You may state a boundary once and then act according to it. These moments may seem small, but to a narcissist, they signal something significant. They are no longer directing your behavior. This is also why narcissists often escalate when they sense control slipping. They may provoke guilt or dismiss you more intensely, not because they are confident, but because they are losing their grip. The escalation is an attempt to pull you back into engagement. The key is not to me. The escalation with intensity of your own. Calm, steady behavior communicates far more power than confrontation ever could. It says, "You do not decide how I respond." And that message repeated over time is what truly unsettles a narcissist. Not anger, not arguments, but your quiet independence. Anger is often misunderstood as power. When you're dealing with a narcissistic person, it can feel natural to believe that showing frustration or standing your ground emotionally will finally make them listen. But anger rarely creates change in this dynamic. More often, it gives them exactly what they are looking for. Narcissistic behavior feeds on emotional energy. Strong reactions, whether they are anger, sadness, or urgency, signal involvement. They show that the interaction matters deeply to you and that emotional investment gives the narcissist leverage. When they see your emotions rise, they know they can still affect you. That sense of impact reinforces their control. Emotional neutrality removes that reinforcement. It is not coldness or indifference. It is the absence of emotional charge. When you respond calmly, without visible frustration or urgency, you are no longer offering feedback that they can use. There is nothing for them to push against, twist, or escalate. This is why neutrality can feel uncomfortable at first. Many people are conditioned to believe that emotional intensity equals honesty or strength. In reality, neutrality is a regulated state. It reflects self-control, clarity, and internal boundaries. You are still present, but you are not reactive. From a narcissist perspective, this shift is destabilizing. They rely on emotional cues to adjust their behavior and maintain dominance. When those cues disappear, they lose information. They cannot easily tell whether their tactics are working. This uncertainty creates unease because predictability is essential to their sense of control. Neutral responses also change the pace of the interaction. Narcissists often move quickly, pressuring others to react before they have time to think. Calm, measured replies slow that process down. When you pause, speak evenly, or choose not to respond at all, you disrupt the rhythm they depend on. Importantly, emotional neutrality does not mean silence in every situation. It can include clear statements, boundaries, or decisions, but delivered without emodio. Null weight. The tone matters as much as the words. A neutral tone communicates that you are not seeking validation, approval, or resolution through emotional exchange. Over time, this approach changes how you are perceived. You are no longer an easy emotional target. The narcissist may test you trying to provoke a reaction, but consistency matters more than perfection. Each neutral response reinforces the message that emotional manipulation will not succeed. Ultimately, emotional neutrality protects you first. It conserves your energy, keeps you grounded, and prevents you from being pulled into cycles that go nowhere. And as a result, it becomes quietly threatening, not because it is aggressive, but because it removes the narcissist's primary source of influence. Many people struggle with boundaries, not because they don't know what they want, but because they feel the need to explain themselves. When dealing with a narcissistic person, long explanations are often mistaken for clarity. In reality, they create openings. Every extra sentence becomes something to challenge, dismiss, or reinterpret. A boundary is not a negotiation. It is a statement of what you will and will not party. Cipate in. The more concise it is, the stronger it becomes. Brief boundaries leave less room for manipulation and reduce the chance of being pulled into a back-and-forth change. Narcissists tend to treat boundaries as invitations to argue. If you justify your limit with emotion, history, or reasoning, they may shift the focus away from the boundary itself and onto your tone, your motives, or you. Our memory. This turns a clear line into a discussion they can control. Finality is what gives a boundary its impact. When you state a boundary and then repeat it multiple times, it can start to lose strength. Repetition signals uncertainty. A boundary delivered once followed by consistent action communicates confidence. It shows that you trust your own decision enough not to defend it. For example, saying, "I'm not available for this conversation," is clearer than explaining why the conversation feels unfair or upsetting. The first statement closes the door. The second opens it. Narcissistic individuals are skilled at walking through those openings and reframing the situation in their favor. It's also important to understand that boundaries are about your behavior, not theirs. You cannot control how someone reacts to your limits. You can only control whether you follow through. When a narcissist ignores or challenges a boundary, the response is not more explanation. It is action. Ending the interaction, changing the subject, or disengaging reinforces the boundary more effectively than words. This approach can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to being responsive or accommodating. Brief boundaries may feel abrupt at first, but clarity is not unkind. It is respectful to yourself and to the situation. Over time, others adjust to the way you present your limits. Narcissists may react strongly to brief final boundaries because they remove their ability to negotiate control. They may accuse you of being cold, unfair, or inflexible. These reactions are not signs that the boundary is wrong. They are signs that it is working. Ultimately, a boundary does not need to convince anyone. It only needs to be clear and consistently upheld. When your words are minimal and your actions align with them, the message becomes unmistakable. Your limits are not up for debate. Explaining yourself feels reasonable. It feels mature, fair, and respectful. Most people are taught that if they communicate clearly enough, misunderstandings will be resolved. In healthy relationships, that is often true. With narcissistic individuals, however, explanations serve a very different function. A narcissist does not listen to explanations to understand you. They listen to gather information. Every detail you offer becomes material they can reshape, minimize, or use against you later. When you explain your feelings, your decisions, or your boundaries, you are revealing what matters to you, and that knowledge gives them leverage. Explanations also shift the power dynamic. The moment you begin justifying yourself, the conversation subtly changes from stating a decision to defending one. This places the narcissist in the position of judge, as if your choice requires their approval. Even if that is not your intention, the structure of the exchange works in their favor. Another issue with explaining is that it invites debate. Narcissistic individuals are often skilled at turning conversations into endless loops. They may focus on small details, question your memory, or challenge your logic, not to reach clarity, but to keep you engaged. The longer the discussion continues, the more control they regain. This is why brief statements are more effective than detailed explanations. Saying "this doesn't work for me" is harder to dismantle than listing reasons. Reasons can be argued with. Personal limits stated calmly cannot. Explaining also increases emotional exposure. When you describe how something hurt you or why a situation was difficult, you are opening an emotional channel. A narcissist may appear to listen, but internally they are tracking where you are vulnerable. Later, those same points may be dismissed, mocked, or used to provoke you. It's important to note that not explaining yourself does not mean being unclear or dismissive. It means recognizing when clarity has already been provided. Once a decision is stated, repeating the explanation rarely proves understanding. More often, it prolongs the interaction and drains your energy. Letting go of explanations can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you value being fair and understood. But fairness does not require self-exposure to manipulation. You are allowed to make decisions without providing a detailed justification. Over time, reducing explanations changes the dynamic. Conversat, yawns become shorter. Emotional intensity decreases. The narcissist may push for more information, accuse you of being vague, or pressure you to elaborate. These reactions are signals that the old patterns are being disrupted. Ultimately, silence and simplicity protect your boundaries better than long explanations ever could. When you stop explaining, you stop giving away pieces of yourself. And in that space, your autonomy becomes much harder to challenge. When people try to protect themselves from a narcissistic individual, they often rely on intensity. They prepare strong speeches, firm confrontations, or emotional declarations, hoping that one powerful moment will finally change the dynamic. While intensity can feel empowering in the moment, it rarely produces lasting results. Narcissistic behavior is not shaped by single events. It is shaped by patterns. What truly influences the dynamic is not how strongly you respond once, but how reliably you respond over time. Consistency creates predictability in your boundaries, and that predictability limits manipulation. Intensity often fluctuates. You may be very firm one day and exhausted the next. From a narcissist's perspective, this inconsistency leaves room for testing. If your boundaries depend on your emotional energy, they become easier to bypass when you are tired, stressed, or distracted. Consistency, on the other hand, does not require emotional force. It requires repetition. Saying the same thing in the same tone, responding the same way to the same behavior, and following through each time communicates stability. T shows that your limits are not reactions, they are decisions. This is especially important because narcissists pay close attention to patterns. They notice when a boundary is enforced once, but not again. They observe when consequences are mentioned but not applied. Over time, they adjust their behavior to exploit these gaps. A consistent response reduces those gaps. For example, if you end a conversation, when it becomes disrespectful, the behavior loses its effectiveness. The narcissist may escalate initially, but without variation in your response, the tactic stops producing results. Consistency also protects you emotionally. Intense confrontations are draining. They require preparation, recovery, and emotional processing. Consistent boundaries, by contrast, become routine. They take less effort because you are not reinventing your response each time. You already know what you will do. Another benefit of consistency is that it shifts the focus from their behavior to yours. You are no longer monitoring, correcting, or reacting to every provocation. You are simply maintaining your own standard. This shift reduces emotional entanglement and increases your sense of company. Control. It's important to understand that consistency does not mean rigidity, it means reliability. You can still be calm, respectful, and flexible within your values. What remains constant is your follow-through. Over time, this approach changes how you are perceived. The narcissist may not like your boundaries, but they learn that pushing against them is ineffective. The drama fades not because they have changed, but because the pattern has. In the end, lasting protection does not come from moments of intensity. It comes from steady, predictable behavior. When your actions align with your words every time, manipulation loses its foothold. Detachment is often misunderstood. Many people confuse it with avoidance, coldness, or indifference. In reality, detachment is a regulated emotional stance. It means you are present enough to respond thoughtfully, but not emotionally invested in managing or changing the other person's behavior. Narcissistic power depends heavily on emotional engagement. When you care deeply about being understood, validated, or approved of, you become easier to influence. Detachment loosens that grip. It shifts your focus away from their reactions and back on to your own choices. This does not mean you stop caring altogether. It means you stop over-functioning in the relationship. You no longer take responsibility for their moods, interpretations, or responses. You allow them to have their reaction without trying to fix it. From a narcissist's perspective, this is disruptive. They rely on emotional feedback to maintain a sense of control. When you detach, their usual tactics, provocation, guilt, or subtle criticism lose effectiveness. There is less emotional return on their effort. Detachment also changes the internal experience for you. Instead of feeling pulled into every interaction, you begin to observe patterns more clearly. You notice how often conversations circle back to their needs, their grievances, or their version of events. This clarity makes it easier to decide when to engage and when to step back. One of the key elements of detachment is reducing emotional urgency. Narcissistic dynamics often create a sense of pressure. Respond now, explain now, fix this now. Detachment allows you to slow that process down. You respond when you choose, not when you are pushed. This can look very simple. You may pause before replying. You may respond with fewer words. You may choose not to respond at all to baiting comments. These choices may seem minor, but they represent a significant shift in control. Detachment also helps prevent escalation. When a narcissist senses emotional distance, they may attempt to provoke stronger reactions. Staying detached during these moments is challenging but important. Escalation is often a test to see if emotional access can be restored over time. Consistent detachment changes the dynamic. The narcissist may label you as distant or unresponsive. What they are really noticing is the absence of emotional leverage. Without that leverage, their influence weakens. Detachment is not about winning or punishing. It is about self-protection. It allows you to interact without losing your sense of self. You remain grounded, clear, and less reactive. Ultimately, detachment disrupts narcissistic power because it removes the emotional fuel they depend on. When you stop investing energy in managing their behavior, you regain autonomy. And that quiet shift, more than any argument, changes everything. Narcissistic dynamics often feel chaotic on the surface, but they are rarely random. Beneath the shifting moods and sudden reactions is a careful attention to patterns. Narcissistic individuals watch how you respond, when you react, and what reliably draws your attention. These patterns give them emotional leverage. Emotional leverage depends on predictability. When someone knows what will upset you, what will pull you into explaining, or what will make you chase resolution, they can use that knowledge to control interactions. Predictable reactions make it easier to provoke specific outcomes. This is why changing your response patterns is so effective. When your behavior becomes steady and less emotionally expressive, the usual triggers stop working. The narcissist can no longer rely on the same emotional shortcuts to regain control. Predictability here does not mean being consistent or reactive. It means being predictably calm. When your responses are measured, brief, and aligned with your boundaries, emotional manipulation loses precision. The narcissist may attempt different tactics, but without clear feedback, their influence diminishes. Many people worry that predictability makes them boring or weak. In reality, emotional predictability creates safety for you. It reduces the highs and lows that keep you emotionally hooked. Instead of reacting differently each time, You choose a stable response that protects your energy. This stability also shortens interactions. Narcissistic behavior often escalates when emotional engagement is high. When reactions are muted and consistent, there is less momentum to continue the exchange. Conversations end sooner. Ending conflict loses intensity. Another important aspect is reducing emotional transparency. You do not need to reveal how deeply something affected you in the moment. Sharing less emotional detail limits the information available for manipulation later. Over time, this changes how much access the narcissist has to your inner world. Predictable calmness can feel unnatural at first, especially if you are used to reacting emotionally. It may take practice to pause, breathe, and choose a response that aligns with your boundaries rather than your immediate feelings. That pause is where leverage shifts. The narcissist may respond by pushing harder, attempting to break through the calm. This is often a sign that their usual methods are failing. Staying consistent during these moments is crucial. Any sudden emotional reaction can reopen the door they are trying to access. Over time, predictable responses teach others how to treat you. When emotional reactions are no longer available on demand, manipulation becomes inefficient. The narcissist may lose interest or adjust their behavior not out of understanding, but because the payoff has changed. Ultimately, predictability weakens emotional leverage because it removes surprise and intensity from the interaction. You become steady rather than reactive. And in that steadiness, control shifts back to you. Many people assume that consequences need to be loud, emotional, or clearly announced to be effective. In narcissistic dynamics, this belief often backfires. Verbal warnings, ultimatums, or repeated explanations tend to become part of the cycle rather than an interruption of it. What actually creates impact is much quieter. Silence, when used intentionally, removes engagement. It is not avoidance or passive behavior. It is a choice to stop feeding the interaction. When you stop responding to provocation, arguments, or baiting statements, you remove the emotional reward the narcissist is seeking. On its own, silence can be confusing, but not always effective. What gives it power is follow through. Follow through means your actions match your stated boundaries. If you say you will disengage from a certain behavior and then consistently do so, silence becomes meaningful. It signals that the boundary is real. Narcissistic individuals often test boundaries repeatedly to see if consequences are temporary or negotiable. If silence is used once but abandoned the next time, it loses credibility. Consistent follow-through teaches them that pushing will not produce a different outcome. This approach also shifts the dynamic away from explanation. You are no longer trying to convince them to change or understand. You are simply acting in alignment with your limits. That shift removes the narcissist's ability to argue ECT, or reframe the situation. Silence can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to resolving conflict through discussion. There may be an urge to clarify, defend, or soften the boundary. That urge is often rooted in anxiety, not necessity. Resisting it allows the consequence to stand on its own. Follow-through does not have to be dramatic. It can be as simple as ending a conversation, aving a situation, or reducing contact. The key is that the action happens without emotional explanation. The message is delivered through behavior, not words. From the narcissist's perspective, this is frustrating. They lose the opportunity to draw you back in through debate or emotion. The lack of response removes their sense of control, and the consistent outcome makes further attempts less effective. Importantly, silence plus follow through is not about punishment. It is about self-protection. You are not trying to teach them a lesson. You are protecting your time, energy, and emotional stability. Over time, this approach creates clarity. The narcissist learns what behaviors result in access and which result in disengagement. Whether they choose to adjust or not, your boundaries remain intact. Ultimately, the most effective consequence is not what you say in the moment, it is what you consistently do afterward. Silence paired with follow-through speaks more clearly than any explanation ever could. When you put all of this together, a clear pattern emerges. Narcissistic power does not come from strength, intelligence, or confidence. It comes from access. Access to your emotions, your explanations, your urgency, and your reactions. Each keynote you've heard points back to that single truth. Loss of control is feared more than confrontation because confrontation still means access. Emotional neutrality disrupts the feedback they rely on. Brief final boundaries remove negotiation. Not explaining yourself closes the door to manipulation. Consistency replaces dramatic moments with steady authority. Detachment breaks emotional dependence. Predictable calm weakens leverage. And silence, when paired with follow-through, becomes the consequence that cannot be argued with. What's important is that none of this requires aggression. There is no need to be harsh, loud, or emotionally intense. In fact, the quiet. Your response, the clearer the message becomes. You are no longer participating in the old dynamic. This approach is not about changing the narcissist, it is about changing your position in the interaction. When your behavior becomes steady, minimal, and self-directed, the entire system shifts. The narcissist may resist, they may test, they may escalate briefly, but without emotional fuel, those attempts lose force. You may notice something else as well. Your own nervous system begins to settle. You are no longer bracing for the next reaction or rehearsing explanations in your head. Your energy stays with you. That calm is not weakness, it is clarity. Ultimately, the sentence that creates fear is not threatening because of what it says, it is threatening because of what follows. When words are matched by action, and action is repeated without emotion, control dissolves.